everyone, and welcome back to James's Classic Movies. Today we're going to go into The Mummy Legacy Collection and other films dealing with the mummy. This film right here would be the fifth in the Legacy Collection concerning, the creature genre. I really don't consider the Invisible Man creature, but I know that would be the final one, the Invisible Man. But let's get right into this. In 1932, The Mummy came out, starring Boris Karloff, playing various roles as the Mummy, such as The Mummy's Hand in 1940, The Mummy's Tomb in 1942, and a pair of movies, The Mummy's Curse and The Mummy's Ghost, came out in 1944. Now that in itself is a vast career for Boris Karloff in just doing the mummies. And of course, Abbott and Costello meet the Mummy in 1955. Now, Hollywood wasn't finished with the mummy genre at that time. Back in in the late 90s, the early 90s for this one, The Mummy Lives, starring Tony Curtis, was another stab into the Mummy legacy. That, like I say, it was filmed in 1993, starring Tony Curtis. And then The Mummy that everybody's familiar with Brendan Fraser, came out in 1999, followed by Mummy 2, The Return of the Mummy, in 2001, then Mummy 3 in 2008, The Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. And then Tom Cruise got into it with The Mummy in 2017, and in 2018 there was supposedly a release of Mummy 2 with Cruise. And then The Rage of the Mummy with Camille de Pablo in 2018 also. I'm hunting down some other movies. Some of these movies. This is The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. That's Mummy 1. And then Mummy 2, The Return. Mummy Returns. Mummy 3 is on the way, along with the other one. Now, this is the first Tom Cruise Mummy. Now, there's supposed to be a second one, as I mentioned before. We'll find out. I've seen trailers for it. Of course, I have not seen the DVD for it as of yet. But when it does, you will know about it, because I will certainly post it on this channel right here. But I want you to watch this clip and get a general idea what the Mummy's all about with Boris Karloff.
Welcome to the gorgeously restored Vista Theater in Los Angeles, which has recreated the mystical Egyptian decor that was so popular in movie palaces of the 1920s. Egypt was all the rage then, in the years following the discovery of King Tut's tomb, with all those legends about its supposedly fatal curse. So, what better place could we have chosen to celebrate Hollywood's most famous restored Egyptian, Boris Karloff, as the Mummy? When Universal released The Mummy, it had already established itself as Hollywood's leading house of horrors, with films like Dracula, Frankenstein, and The Old Dark House. But The Mummy was something radically different. This time, the monster was also a halfway sympathetic lover, and the timeless romantic fantasy of a love transcending time and space inspired countless other films. So let's do a little archaeological excavating of our own as we unearth the original story of our mummy dearest.
What's the matter, man? For heaven's sakes, what is it?
He went for a little walk. You should have seen his face.
By the time Boris Karloff took his legendary midnight stroll in Universal's The Mummy, the public was already familiar with the mysteries of ancient Egypt through the spectacular discovery, a decade earlier, of King Tutankhamun's treasure-laden tomb. Almost as fascinating as the treasures were the stories, fueled by an eager press, of a deadly curse believed to strike down all those who disturbed Tutankhamun's resting place.
Death, eternal punishment for anyone who opens this casket. Good heavens, what a terrible curse.
If anybody died who was even distantly related to anybody who was around when the tomb was opened, this would be news. This would be an indirect evidence of the curse at work.
Even if the curse was bogus, the Egyptian belief in immortality wasn't. To assure resurrection, an elaborate ritual of mummification evolved. The jackal-headed god Anubis presided over the embalming rites, which required 70 days for completion. Curiously, the screenplay that became The Mummy was not originally an Egyptian story at all. Asked to develop a vehicle for the new horror superstar Boris Karloff, screenwriter and journalist Nina Wilcox Putnam concocted Cagliostro, based on the legend of a historical figure who claimed to have lived for centuries.
The historical figure of that name was a poor Italian in the 18th century who passed himself off as an alchemist and a hypnotist, conducted seances, became a fashionable figure, apparently, in the aristocratic world of France.
Putnam's story was substantially revised by John L. Balderston, a playwright who had collaborated on both Dracula and Frankenstein. He also knew a thing or two about mummies.
Well, he was always a student of history. He loved reading history. We had all kinds of books around the house. And Egypt, of course, was one of the main parts of ancient history, ancient civilization. And he was intrigued by it. And he was in London after World War I. He worked for the New York World as a correspondent. And one of his assignments just turned out to be the opening of King Tutankhamun's tomb. So, of course, you know, he was in his element. He loved it.
The Mummy marked the directorial debut of Karl Freund, the celebrated German cinematographer who had already photographed Universal's Dracula, taking his trademark mobile camera deep into Transylvanian crypts. Freund also shot the highly expressionistic Murders in the Rue Morgue, in which Bela Lugosi played the Dracula-like role of a scientist who also needed women's blood, not for sustenance, but for mad evolutionary experiments. For The Mummy, Freund would get to call all the shots and not just the visual ones.
Imhotep, high priest of the temple of the sun at Karnak. Poor old fellow, now what could you have done to make him treat you like that?
Balderston's screenplay renamed The Mummy Imhotep after the real Egyptian architect who built the first pyramid. For a while, Imhotep was a working title of the film, along with King of the Dead. Meanwhile, Universal was slightly renaming the film's star as well.
Well, he was billed as Karloff the Uncanny. And at that time, and today also, there are very few stars that are billed just by their last name. So he had achieved an awful lot between the years 1931 and 1933, between the first Frankenstein film and the filming of The Mummy.
Once more, Karloff would wear an extraordinary makeup created by Universal's resident wizard, Jack Pierce.
I think what made the Mummy makeup work was Karloff and Karloff's face. He had this great bone structure for it, and his performance, even though there was, he was supposed to be this dead thing coming back to life, it was, that was very subtle, but it was frightening. And I think Pierce, the combination of Pierce and Karloff was such a great combination, and they were such a great team, and with the two of them together, they've made these classic images in horror films that I don't think will ever be matched.
In preparation for the makeup, studio publicity claimed that Pierce had carefully studied ancient Egyptian embalming techniques.
I really have no clue what research he did. You know, when you look at real mummies, the first mummy that I ever saw was the mummy, the Boris Karloff, in the Jack Pierce makeup, and I thought that's what mummies look like. When I finally saw pictures of Ramesses, I found that he was actually kind of different looking. I mean, it wasn't quite the same effect.
I think actually putting the makeup on for the mummy and taking it off took longer than the makeup for Frankenstein.
Again, you know, I only know what I've read, and I read something about, I think, 8 hours to do the mummy, which I can believe, especially since Pierce was responsible for wrapping his body as well. Back in those days, especially, again, they only had the materials of spirit gum and cotton and collodion and stuff like that, but something we even do today is called an old age stipple, where you actually stretch the person's skin. And then I'm sure what he did is paint a layer of spirit gum on Karloff, stick some cotton on him, and I understand he used some Egyptian cotton as well, I think just because of the finer cotton. Glued that on, painted over it with either more spirit gum or collodion, and dried it. And then once it was dried, he released it, and it would form these wrinkles. And I'm sure he did many layers and kind of built up. Where it didn't form enough, he would add a little bit more and build it up. Very tedious, very time-consuming, very painful, I'm sure, for Boris. And I still can't believe, you know, having this collodion and stuff around your eyes. And he must have teared up through this whole process. Had to hold his breath as well, I'm sure.
Fortunately, he didn't have to wear the bandages as Imhotep, except for a very brief period of time on camera. But it was really excruciatingly painful to take that makeup off. I know that they spent hours and hours and hours putting it on for the first day.
My understanding was Pierce didn't even consider the fact that Boris might have to relieve himself sometime during the day, and that became a bit of a problem.
And when they completed it, they discovered that he said, well, you've done a wonderful job, but you've forgotten to give me a fly.
For the exotic dual role of Princess Anksunamun and her modern-day counterpart, Universal cast the Hungarian-born New York stage actress Zita Johann.
Zita Johann had been a powerhouse Broadway dramatic actress of the 1920s. She had played in Mackinac, in which she played a murderess who was screaming to the electric chair. Terrific dramatic actress, and she believed in what she called the theater of the spirit. She sat in her dressing room before each performance, and she said her prayers, died unto herself, as she put it, and became her character.
There's death there for me, and life for something else inside me that isn't me. But it's alive too, and fighting for life. Save me from it, Frank. Save me.
With this almost sacred approach to acting, at the same time, she had a very enormous disrespect for Hollywood. And as she told me in her very richly theatrical way, I had more respect for the whores on 42nd Street than I did for the stars in Hollywood. When I met her in 1979 at her pre-Revolutionary War house up by the Hudson River, she was still drama incarnate. She gave the interview by sitting on a chase lounge and adjusting her lighting before she began to talk, and we weren't filming anything. I mean, that was just her.
Zita Johann was a remarkable actress, and when I first got to know her, it was rather guarded that she told me about her interest in the occult. But the more we got into the making of the mummy and the more she relaxed, she actually began to discuss her interest in the occult sciences.
I am Anksunamun, but I'm somebody else too. I want to live.
Well, that was informative. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, that's part of your legacy collection of the Mummy, featuring Boris Karloff as the Mummy. It certainly shows how things have changed over the years, such as makeup for the monster or the mummy. I mean, today we have prosthetics and CGI. Back then, they didn't have all that. I mean, the monsters had to be made up, taking hours upon hours of makeup and like his daughter said, painful removal. But things have gotten better in Hollywood for as far as makeup and stuff. But some of it, you know, can be painful. But like I was saying, I hope you enjoy the Mummy series with the Legacy Collection and the newer mummies that I brought to you. And like I said before, when I get the newer pictures in, like any pictures that I have, as I get, the second videos or stuff like that, I'll bring it to your attention immediately. That way you don't miss out. Until next time, I'm James with James's Classic Movies. Thank you for watching.